in discussing environmental impact of pesticides. Our first session is about citizen-led pesticide screening in Lake Naivasha feeder rivers. And this will be led by Enoch Kiminta from the Kenya National Association of Water Resources Users.
My name is Enoch Kiminta. I work for a community organization called Kenya National Water Resource Users Association. And this is a national umbrella body that brings together community water resource users association across Kenya. There are about 779 in total. These are communities who are co-managing water resources with the government of Kenya through the Water Resources Authority, for those of you who understand how the water sector looks like. So I'm very much privileged to be in front of you, scientists, communities, students, in speaking about this menace of pesticides. It's becoming a problem, and it is, if it is not checked, it is slowly consuming our environment and our people. So as an organization, we are focusing on sustainable management and the development of water resource use of water resource management. And we work very, very closely with the local communities through the Water Resource Users Association. And one component that we are really implementing as an organization is how can you ensure that communities have hands-on experience in terms of monitoring their respective water resources, which includes wetlands, lakes, and rivers, and even some are also monitoring groundwater. So through an initiative called Citizen Science, we are training local communities to become community scientists themselves. So for us, it's not about the white coats, the beautiful gumboots, the gloves, and all that. These are communities living closely with these resources who are doing monitoring, measuring a number of parameters, which includes pH, water temperature, default oxygen, E. coli, coliforms, turbidity, name all those. So we are providing very simple measuring kits to these communities so that they are able to monitor their health, the health of their rivers, and they are able to make use of that data for local interventions, identify solutions, advocacy in terms of ensuring that duty bearers are responsible, holding polluters accountable in terms of using this data as evidence. So with the support of the EU Research Commission, mid last year we did a study on Lake Naivasha, whereby we did a screening of, we just wanted to understand what kind of pesticides are finding their way into our rivers, and what impact is it having both to people and of course to the biota, that is the life, or rather the aquatic life in our systems. So this Route to Food initiative that the whole foundation, which says that in 2015, around 2015, there were 6,400 tons of pesticides that are being used in Kenya. And that has gone up from that number to almost 15,600 tons in 2019. So that tells you, as population grows, more demand for food is going up, more land is being subdivided to allow for agricultural practices, and as agriculture goes up, demand for pesticide continues going. And of course, this contributes to contamination of our water bodies, threatening the aquatic system and the health of the population. And the gap that we had is that previously in Lake Naivasha, focus has been on very few legacy pesticides. In terms of, Naivasha is the leading economic activity is floriculture. So studies that have been done in Naivasha were basically looking at pesticides the flower farms were using, leaving out the other farmers in terms of small scale farmers. So we were combining citizen engagement to advance extraction and analyze technology that we use to detect the 230 pesticides. The methodology we use is we trained those community members, or rather the community scientists, who did the extraction of those samples. So, the strategy again was we involved the communities in terms of how do we collect those samples. So, the community collected 100 millimeters of water samples from 7 sites. So, I don't know whether it is clear in the map. That is the Lake Naivasha basin. And those are the sites, about 7 sites. Actually, it was 7 sites that the communities collected all those samples. And this include 2 feeder rivers, main feeder rivers, that emanate from the Aberdares, a very critical catchment for Lake Naivasha. And for those of you who remember, I think 2 months ago, there was a report published by the University of Egerton about the potatoes. Do you remember? Yeah. So most of those pesticides are part of what we discovered in this study. So we were using a very simple kit called the Staba, whereby communities collect a sample from these 7 sampling points. We take it to the laboratory. It is starred, and then we store it in a very special containers provided by the EU Research Commission, and then we shipped it to the Netherlands for further studies. So, and these were the findings. So we detected a number of pesticides, which includes fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, and many others. So, and 13 pesticides were found in the 100% of the samples that we collected, and this includes fungicides, which includes boscalid, tebuconazole. Forgive me, I may not pronounce them properly; they are quite scientific. And the insecticides include chlorpyrifos, diazidone, and the herbicide is metallochlor. I hope I'm pronouncing properly. So, and the points were, we had 3 points around Lake Naivasha, River Gilgil, and then the main river that feeds the lake, which is River Malewa, and then there is a seasonal river called Maraigushu and River Karate. And we found out that the main point where these chemicals were found at the wastewater treatment plant discharge at Lake Naivasha, which had the highest number of detection, which is a total of 43 pesticides. Now, in terms of concentration, so we found out that the site at Karate River recorded the highest concentration, which is on the far right, and the reason why is because in the catchment of this particular river, there are a lot of agricultural activities, a few flower farms that are doing cultivation along the banks of this river, and that explains why it has the highest concentration of the pesticides that we collected. And of course, the second one is Lake Naivasha, and basically it is because of the treatment plant, and of course the flower farms that are surrounding Lake Naivasha. So detection of banned pesticides, for instance, dieldridanate, hexchlorobenzene, indicating that they persist in nature in the environment long after being banned. So these chemicals are still in use, yet they have been banned, I think, in the year 2014. So, so in terms of how is it impacting the ecosystem, we have found out that the Daphnia magna, yeah, is really not doing well, especially around these sampling sites, which is Lake Naivasha, Gilgil, and the other two rivers. So if you see the dotted line, it indicates that the TU threshold for Daffodil magna, it is not doing quite well. And it's because of these pesticides that we found. And take note that chloropyrifos was scheduled for ban in last year, that is in 2024. So I hope the champions who are here, as far as this pesticide is concerned, we need to join hands and see and follow up on this, on why it is still in the Kenyan flowers. So I hope I'm doing well in time. Yep. So in terms of summary, I don't know whether it is clear from behind. So we found 56 pesticides distributed amongst the fungicides that I've just mentioned, the insecticides, herbicides, and other compounds that were found. And mostly we detected bascolite, biomagrophyte, and metacol. These are very, very dangerous chemicals that are found in our water bodies, and therefore actions need to be taken as far as this is concerned. So, and I think that is the end of my presentation. I hope I've respected my time. And this is, if you want to read the report, just scan that QR code, and you'll be able to see the whole report as far as that study is concerned. Thank you very much.
I'm going to tell us a bit about the studies that we have done in the Lake Victoria South Basin. We do a lot of studies on chemicals of emerging concern. They are also known as emerging chemicals. Pesticides is one of them, pesticides and biocides. We all know about pharmaceuticals and the rest, but today we are excited about pesticides. But just to let you know that we also do research on these other emerging contaminants. So pesticides, or rather emerging contaminants, these are not new chemicals. They are chemicals that have been there. It's only that technological advancements have made us able to detect these compounds in the environment. You might wonder how these pesticides find themselves into the environment. Zilke, I think, more probably talked about this. So it starts off from the production. Apply them in our crops, in our farms. Could be also in the, then it can go to the dump site when we are disposing them. We can also spread it through the manure, and it can end up into the surface water or groundwater. And depending on the source of your drinking water, it can also end up in your drinking water. So why are they emerging? This is because they are toxic. So you are all familiar with these phrases, as crazy as a painter or as mad as a hatter. So they are because they are things that came up because of the toxic effects of chemicals. And pesticides, as we've already had from the morning session, falls among this emerging concern because of the toxicity. So to have a look more in Kenya, more focused in Africa, or specifically in Kenya. From my bio, you heard that I studied quite a lot in Europe. I still do research there. And every time I'm there, I mean, a lot of studies on pesticides and all these emerging contaminants have been done there. And so when everybody would ask me, where are you from? And I would say Kenya. They would always respond with, oh, where Eliud Kipchoge comes from. That's true. We recently took all 1, 2, 3 podium at the New York Marathon. Then it's also known for the safaris and also the beautiful landscape. I must boast that the landscape is actually the route to my grandma's home. But what about pesticides? Not much is known. And this is because of the lack of information, the lack of data that is out there. We can see this from this map from Hung and Lee. you can see that a lot of studies have been done in North America, in South America, but there's really limited information that is coming from the African continent. In fact, Kenya, South Africa, Ethiopia are among the countries that are really leading this monitoring. So based on this, we decided to narrow this knowledge gap. So our study area, that was the Lake Victoria South Basin, located in, of course, Africa, in Kenya, western part of Kenya. And there, for this particular study, we had 48 sites distributed among the 7 counties here shown. Pardon me, I think it's the lighting that is making the graphics not so clear, probably at the back. So we had 7 counties where the population is approximately 3.5 million. And the land use there is majorly agriculture, urban, and also residential areas. And the main objective was to actually monitor these contaminants in the different compartments. So we focused on water, on biota, and also on sediments, and also looked at the risk to aquatic organisms and to human beings. To have a view of how our sampling sites looked like, we had rice irrigation fields in Ahero, tea growing areas. We sampled sugarcane growing areas and also maize plantations. There we looked at the reservoirs, rivers, drainage canals, and lakes. And we did this study in September, October, which coincided with the short rainy season in Kenya. For the sampling, we collected water. For water, we did not do any analysis, pre-treatment. We just directly injected it into the machine. That's the liquid chromatography coupled to the high resolution mass spec. Thanks to collaboration once again. This would not be possible here in Kenya. And then we extracted the snails using a method known as the catcher's approach. And the sediments we also extracted and also did cleanup. So as I mentioned, we do a lot of chemicals, monitoring of chemicals, which were 428 for this particular study. But for specifically pesticides, we targeted 152 pesticides and their transformation products, and also went a step further because these pesticides were made out of a list of pesticides that are commonly monitored in Europe, but not in Africa, or rather in Kenya. So we did suspect screening and added 133 pesticides from which are registered in Kenya. And so what did we find in water? So a total of 26 parent compounds and 5 transformational products of pesticides and biocides. Here we can see from the graph. Apologies once again for the graphics. The highest detection frequency was for simazine. The fungicide dodemop was also present in more than half of the sampling sites, and also with bendiocab. Highest concentrations was up to 1.5 micrograms per liter, and this was reported for the herbicide hexazinon. For the snails and the sediments, so first off with the snails, we found 19 pesticides in the snails, and atrazine was the winner here, which was found at 375 nanogram per gram wet weight. So atrazine was also detected in almost all the sites, so 95%, followed by DEET. This is a common insect repellent, especially against mosquito bites. For the sediments, we had 55 pesticides which were detected with concentrations of up to 110 nanogram per gram, which was normalized to organic carbon. And this was reported for pyrimidine methyl. For the farmers in the house, this is what we commonly call actelic. Then what we also observed is that when we looked further into biota and sediments, we found we were able to report more compounds. So compounds that we missed out in the water, such as acetamiprid and thiacloprid. So this we were not able to find in the water, but we were able to report them in the biota and the sediments. So based on the land use, the rice and the sugarcane growing areas were most contaminated compared to the maize and the tea. This could be because of the especially for the tea, we think it's a mismatch between the spraying regime and the sampling time, or it could also be with the buffer zone, because the teas have more buffer area as compared to rivers that are flowing through rice and sugarcane growing areas. In terms of risk, we actually found the same as what Enoch also reported. So we did this for fish, crustaceans, and algae, and crustaceans were the most sensitive species. Here I show the results for the crustaceans, and diazinon was the compound that was driving the risk. So any site that had diazinon, the acute risk threshold was already exceeded. Other compounds are like bendiocarb, carbendazim, and as well as pyrimidine. Then we went a step further to look at seasonality, because the other study was only one-off in the October short rainy season. In another study, we looked at the whole year. So in Kenya, we experienced 2 wet seasons and 2 dry seasons. So we went and focused on 5 rivers. Then we did solid phase extraction, an additional step to the direct injection. And here we had a broader target list of 785 compounds. And what we saw, again, apologies for the graphics, a total of 80 pesticides and biocides were reported throughout, 22 pesticides being present all through the season. So it wouldn't matter if it was in May or in October, these pesticides were present in the water system. Higher numbers were detected in the wet season in May. This is because most of the farmers are spraying their fields, and especially with herbicides, which was also observed. So 2,4-D, hydroxyatrazine, and metribuzin are usually sprayed at the onset of the rains. And these were really high in this particular sampling campaign. So from aquatic organisms, we also went ahead to look at the risk to human health. And this is what Silke was also presenting earlier on. We focused on schistosomiasis, which is also known as bilharzia. It's a neglected tropical disease, but it has also been reported in Corsica in France and also in Spain. And this is, of course, because of climate change, of course, pesticide pollution, which calls for more research. And what we saw is actually what Silke already explained, so I don't need to take much time here, that the host snails were really tolerant. So to the extent that it was at the solubility level of imidacloprid and diazinon, they were still not dying. But for the competitors, they were all dead. So you can already see from the species sensitivity distribution graph. So we could actually see a pesticide-induced shift in risk in community composition. So the driver of the host snails, the host snails being the drivers, and then increasing the transmission of schistosomiasis. Yeah, initially I was not a fan of the species sensitivity graphs. I used to have a very difficult time understanding them. And so I also generated an AI comic of the paper. And so it looks like this. So it's very basic for those who are like me before. So it's basically saying that the rivers look different. It looks like the snails are taking over. They are super tough against these pesticides. So, which means that most snails mean higher risk of schistosomiasis for us all. Pesticides levels are called safe. So that's thanks to AI, not me. Yeah, so with that, I would like to conclude showing that our waters are quite contaminated with pesticides, and we really need to do something. So a lot of already has been said in the morning about infrastructure, and these are water systems that are used by the locals. So it's not water that is somewhere flowing, but this is water that we were finding locals. In fact, we had to ask for them permission for us to sample. Yeah. So it's water that is people are drinking, people are cooking with it, children are bathing, and so the exposure is really on them. So we need infrastructure. We need to create awareness to the local population. Policies has been said in the morning. I don't need to repeat. And we also need multi-stakeholder in coordination and engagement, because it's not only scientific, but we need everybody else. And to finish off, I want to also talk about CITAC, an organization I'm really passionate about, especially for the students here. I have really benefited from CITAC. CITAC stands for the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry. It's a global society. We are over 90 countries there. And it's just advancing environmental science and environmental management. So please look out, because we also have the CITAC journals that you can also publish there. And with that, I would like to thank you for.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for not being possible to join you in person, but there are teaching duties. I'm presenting some results indeed for soils. So I'm very grateful that indeed the context also for waters has been already in place. And now I'm following up with some evidence about soil pollution. And I presented these results already earlier this year in AFAO webinar. So if you were there, you might see some repetition, but I think it's very important to stress indeed not only the findings, but also the implications of this. So I'd like to start by what we know. Actually, for soils, I also start, like colleagues, to dig into the literature to understand what was already available in terms of pesticide contamination for African soils. And I found quite a few number of studies, 88 actually, covering 25 African countries. But when I look deeper, I realized that actually most of these data come from 3 countries only. Most of the data was very restricted in terms of compounds that they were analyzing, and also they were rather old. Most of the data were collected prior to 2015. So as happens in other regions of the world, information about soil pollution by pesticides in soil is rather scarce and fragmented. So the Soils for Africa project, which was a project that ran in the past 5 years, so finished earlier this year, was actually a great opportunity to explore and to have a first insight, a comprehensive insight into pesticide contamination in soils. So we have indeed, we retrieve 272 samples from the broader project campaign, and we analyze them for pesticide residues. So for some locations, this was the first evidence. For others, it also gave a reference in terms of trends of evolution. And the idea about was indeed to set a first comprehensive data set for discussion, hopefully also to trigger discussion about research agenda and pesticide and policy recommendations. So here in this slide, it's not about the details, but I wanted just to show you the list of pesticides that we analyze in each one of these samples. It was rather comprehensive. So we look into application records, we look into what was found in literature, and also what was most likely to be found also based on approved registered products in the countries that we were sampling. And we end up using 4 analytical methods in each sample, which cover both active substances and metabolites. So yeah, this is the list that we have done. So in total, we analyze 153 pesticide residues. And jumping right away into results, I think that is also where more art is to say. So we realized that only 56 out of the 270 samples that we analyzed were pesticide-free. And I put them between quotes because, well, again, we analyzed for 153, but does not mean that if extended further and further, that others could not pop up. So yeah, so only 21% of the soils were pesticide-free. Then 53 samples had 1 single pesticide residue, and the most common, so the rule here was mixtures of pesticide residues. It was rather simple mixtures in the sense of complexity, so quite often the soils had between 2 to 5 pesticide residues, and for your reference, that is also the case actually in Europe, where most of the pesticide studies in soil have taken place. So it's some alignment on there. and we found a maximum of 14 pesticide residues in soil samples. Again, for reference, in Europe, we found sometimes up to 21, 25. So seems a lower diversity of products, or of least lower persistence is in place in Africa. We found, nevertheless, because also of the spatial coverage, quite some diversity in terms of the composition of these mixtures. And we were trying to explore potential application records to explain some of the co-occurrence of these contaminants, or even the potential background contamination, but revealed to be a very extremely challenging aspect, so getting these application records. In the right, the map in the right, you can see a visual distribution of our findings in terms of pesticide content and also number of pesticides in soil samples. And you can see that there are areas where you see more green, so where contamination was indeed lower. And there are areas where the red bubbles are dominant, where indeed we found the highest number of residues and also often the highest amounts of pesticide residues, which might relate with differences in agricultural land intensification practices, pesticide regulations, and so on. So then we look into the breakdown of these findings per country and also per crop type, because we also had some the possibility to look into different crops. And here in the left part of the bar, you see indeed about the number of pesticide residues, in the right about the pesticide levels. And just by first impression, you can see that, for instance, in some countries you don't see green, which means that all samples had pesticide residues. And you can also see that in some countries and some crops, you see a section of dark red, which means the higher contamination degree. Of course, the context in terms of regulation and also climate conditions might explain, at least partially, these findings. But that is what we are trying here, is to provide evidence and results to trigger investigations and discussions. We have also looked into the pesticides that we found. And I heard from a previous speaker that in water they found mainly fungicides. Well, in soil we found mainly insecticides, which is not surprising per se, because indeed they tend to be also more persistent in soil than other types of contaminants. We look also into the levels of the pesticides, both at an individual level, but also as combination. So when we put all the pesticides in a sample together, and we saw here sometimes levels up to 7 milligrams per kilogram. Again, it's very hard to make judgments straightforward based on the levels because of lack of thresholds for most pesticides. But again, as reference, I can inform you that in Europe, these levels are usually higher, but it is also uncertain about how does this translate into soil health and to soil services. So what we did next was to explore the characteristics of these pesticide residues. And here in the right, you can have a table where I listed the 7 most common pesticides in African soils. So it goes from dinoterp to DDE, a metabolite of DDT, chlorpyrifos, metallochlor, atrazine hydroxy 2, which is a metabolite of atrazine, AMPA, which is a metabolite of glyphosate, and we have also imidacloprid. So all of these were 10% of the samples, and all these compounds are of concern in terms of environmental, ecological, or human health aspects. So that is quite confronting in a way, I would say, because they are indeed the most common. And what we did next was to try to understand where are these coming from. So we cross the information that we measured in terms of occurrence and levels against the available information in terms of application records. We cross it also against approval registration status in the country where the sample was collected, but also against the European status. And we also explore the persistence of these pesticide residues in soil. So here in the map, on the left side of the slide, you can see the different countries' profiles. And you can see, for instance, in Burkina Faso that we found 14 different pesticide residues. And then most of them are actually not approved in Burkina Faso. Part of them might be easily explained because they are a very persistent pesticide residues, so they may have been applied before the ban of these pesticide residues, but not fully. So I think indeed this part of not fully requires indeed further investigation about possible transboundary transport of some pesticides, which has been flagged as indeed a problem. Compounds that were most common in Kenya, for instance, that imidacloprid, the most common pesticide residue in Kenyan agricultural soils, but actually AMP and glyphosate were the ones that have the highest levels. We did also a risk analysis, so we'll look into known toxicity of these compounds against soil organisms. We retrieve information from different type of databases, and there's one that is quite standard, that is risk quotients, which resulted in the pie chart that you can see in the top right of my slide. And basically this risk quotient analysis highlighted that 69%, apologies, not percent, 69 of the samples of the 272 have actually high risk towards soil organisms and potentially towards soil ecosystem functions. You can also see there is a gray section in this pie chart. So for 16 samples, they have pesticide residues for which we could not find hazard information. So we don't know if it is indeed of low, medium, or high concern. So that also highlighted knowledge gaps about compounds that are currently in soils. So what we did next was indeed to go from this overall impression towards the drivers of toxicity, so try to identify which compounds leads to this high risk. And for that, we use the risk quotient, but also a new pesticide prioritization indicator, which has the advantage to account for frequency. So it does not account only for the levels, but also for the frequency of these compounds in soils, and accounts also for knowledge gaps. So they attribute a certain weight to knowledge gaps. So in a way might reduce the uncertainty of the risk. And by combining these two approaches, the risk quotient and the pesticide prioritization indicator, we end up with 17 pesticide residues of highest interest. And I'm not saying concern on purpose, I'm saying of highest interest for investigations, for discussion, potentially to be tackled by research agenda and policy recommendations. So these 17 compounds, in our perspective and based on this approach, could be of higher interest indeed for the African soil management discussions and panels. We did this exercise for each one of these countries. So in the publication that we prepare, country-specific analysis are provided, including the compounds, the top 3 that we found by these metrics to be of highest interest. So for instance, again, here in Kenya, AMPA, because of its high frequency, comes across as a top interest compound. DDT, which actually due to high toxicity also comes across as one, and atrazine hydroxy 2 as a combination of both frequency and toxicity towards soil organisms. So in terms of conclusions, well, These efforts from the Soils for Africa provided a large-scale comprehensive assessment into soil contamination by pesticide residues and corroborates findings from other regions of the world about widespread pesticide soil contamination. We take a look indeed into, by reference, the lack of thresholds for most pesticide residues. Reference against European, the African soils present generally lower levels of pesticides than European ones. That said, that does not mean that does not exist risk for soil health, and that also highlight actually that it's better to know earlier and to know when that is still at manageable levels, how to indeed better secure the intensification of production in these countries. Results also highlight a high frequency of non-approved substances in African agricultural soils. For that, transboundary can be one of explanation. Implementation of bans might also be an explanation. But indeed, without further knowledge about application records, about local characteristics and practices and regulations, it's difficult to make further generalizations. Another conclusion was that African agricultural soils have a short set of compounds that are quite common. We highlighted 7 here in this short list: dinoter, DDE, chlorpyrifos, metallochlor, atrazine, hydroxy-2, AMPA, and imidacloprid. And all of them are of high concern based on environmental, ecotoxicological, or toxicological criteria. We also saw that 25% of our locations show high-risk oceans. Of course, these are based on theoretical approaches, and it's important in these tests. If tested, for instance, a battery of ecotoxicological tests, if this indeed proves to be accurate, or if in different interactions among these potential the risk and bigger than anticipated. We also say to that the indicators that we the risk quotient might not be the most sensitive in cases of knowledge gaps, and also in cases where toxic compounds remain at lower level than others. So indeed, having a more integrated approach is advised.
Progress.
To tackle, to investigate it, and to implement decisions. These kind of findings highlight indeed transboundary impacts of pesticide use in food production, and also the importance of having research agenda and policy needs hand in hand with the scientific developments and also current local practices challenges. And indeed, despite all the unknowns, this supports further evidence that further discussion about more sustainable practices and further implementation of more sustainable practices is urgently needed. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any question.
For the introductions, my name is Bernard Wambale. I come from Uganda, and I'm serving with Consent. Consent is just a consumer protection organization. Our interest is on consumer protection. And then I also serve as the national coordinator at the Food Safety Coalition of Uganda, an umbrella body of different organizations, academia, and other colleagues, basically focusing on food safety. And at the coalition, we basically do on the 4 things. So we're doing research on food safety, of course, where the chemicals come in handy. But also we do now use that research for advocacy, for awareness, and for capacity building. And that's basically what the coalition does. Now, let me dive into the chemicals. Now, there is, as you well know, there are different narratives that the industry and other players are thinking about. They keep telling us about climate change. You know, we are solving a problem of climate change. They talk about pests and diseases on the rise. They keep telling us about food security. Unfortunately, in Africa, we see that most of the households are now actually food insecure amidst the pesticides that they think would be solutions. And then we see people bringing about agricultural yield. We want to boost agricultural yield, etc. And of course, because of that narrative, then we see a lot of pesticides and other sorts of things. In Uganda now, you realize that almost every trading center has a shop selling these pesticides. So you'll see that pesticides are now all over, even in the villages where you wouldn't expect them. I also wanted to provide you some bit of context on the Ugandan case. How is the situation on pesticides looking like? When you look at the Ugandan case, we are not deficient of laws. We are not deficient of policies. We are not deficient of regulatory frameworks. We have them. The constitution is very clear. The national environment policies are existing. We even have the Agrochemicals Control Act. All those are there. But also we are sent to other global or international frameworks. But amidst all these provisions, we see that we still have challenges with the pesticides. If you look at the trend in Uganda, you realize that we're just having an increase. Currently, in the last 10 years, we see that the pesticides that are being imported in Uganda are actually increasing. And similarly, the amount of money that these guys are grabbing from our country is also increasing. So if you see in 2010, we're just having an investment of $32 million US. And now 2022, we're at 75 million. So meaning that the industry is actually growing within the country. Now, when you look at the registration status of these pesticides in our country, currently we have 115 active ingredients that are registered. And then we have 669 brands. So if you go to the Ugandan market, you'll be able to see 669 brands of these pesticides. But surprisingly, if you look at the active ingredients that are registered fully in Uganda, we learn that closer to 50%, about 47.8% of them are highly hazardous. So meaning that you have closer to half of the active ingredients which are fully registered, but they're highly hazardous. Now, when you come to the brands, it's even worse, that 68% of the registered brands in our country are actually highly hazardous. That is the situation we are dealing with. Now, if you look at these molecules in our country, we learn that 65.5% of the chemicals in Uganda are actually not approved for use in the countries of origin. So you have more than half of the molecules that are being used by our farmers but cannot be used in the countries of origin. That's how sad it is. And for our farmers who are here, this simply means that if these molecules are highly hazardous, they are carcinogenic in nature, meaning they can cause a cancer when you have exposure. Means they are mutagenic, they can actually alter our DNA, our genetic makeup. Some of them are actually endocrine disruptors, meaning that they can actually affect your system of the body that is supporting you to make hormones. Can you imagine that? That's what it means. That some of them are actually reproductive toxicants, meaning that if you have exposure to them, then you may have challenges with reproduction. That's where you see in women, so many studies have been done to show that actually there is infertility in women. You can have menstrual irregularities, you can have preterm birth, etc., because of the exposure to these pesticides. That's basically what this means. And unfortunately, all of us have been exposed in one way or the other through the food and air. I tried to bring to you how the Ugandans are exposed in different ways. You can see that the way our women are mixing chemicals, the way they are spraying them without any protection, all this can expose our farmers to these problems. Similarly, you see that the empty bottles of these pesticides actually end up in our kitchens. Can you imagine that? When they are empty, the women and our families, they keep putting, salt, sugar, tea leaves, etc., in those empty bottles of pesticides. So if these are highly hazardous pesticides and the bottles are being used for storage of, commodities that we are eating, what does that mean? What about if you have these empty bottles and then these empty bottles are being used for packaging water? Children go to school with these bottles and, the mother has packed water in such an empty bottle. I mean, what about now in landfills? So you'll find that our landfills are filled with these bottles. And at the end of the day, where do they end? Probably in the soil, in the water, etc. Now, if you look at how our farmers are spraying, I just want to take you through this first photo here. The gentleman is spraying oranges, whatever, and then the chemical lands on the tomato, rather on the orange, and then bounces back to the nose, to the mouth, the ears, everywhere. If you look at the second gentleman there, he's spraying but closer to the water source. And he's naked, by the way. I would say naked or half naked, whatever it is. So meaning that if he's sweating, the body is going to just absorb this chemical directly into his skin. But is this farmer aware of this kind of situation? And then if you look at this other gentleman down there, while he thinks he's wearing a shirt, but the shirt is torn, and then you see that pump, the chemical has already overflown. And what that means is that every time he's sweating, the pesticide is automatically entering his skin. Now, there are other things we can learn from South Africa when they had one of the chemical stores burned. And all this went into the water bodies of our people. So we have a challenge there. So all this is exposure. Now, after having all this background, we decided to go through some sort of understanding of our situation. And we looked at the water we consume. Could these pesticides actually be in the water that we take in? So what we did was to look at, water quality and started assessing water for pesticide residues. And for our case, we got the 4 regions of the country. And then in each of those regions, we got about 4 districts in each of them. And we went and picked water samples in those community water sources. And for this case, we collected water from 86 water sources. And these were community water sources where we picked water samples. And the way we picked these samples, we picked them twice. So we first picked samples in April when the season was starting. And then later on, we picked samples in June when the season was at the top. And then some of the findings are right here. Of course, we picked water from bore, protected springs, shadoofs, dams, open wells, lakes, streams, and taps. And very surprisingly, in the month of April, when we picked the first samples at the start of the season, you'd realize that we found 7 molecules, pesticides in the water sources. But in June, when we picked this water from the same sources, the amount of pesticides had actually increased 3.6-fold. So we're now looking at 25 in the same water sources. So meaning that agriculture, as the agriculture season advances, the amount of pesticides also keep on increasing because the farmers keep using them. So we see a 94% of our water sources at least had a detectable pesticide residue. So what is in our glasses, we see that in all regions, if you go to east, a little bit of the summary is there, but we see that glyphosate and diclovos, chlorpyrifos were the most detectable in the eastern region, but also in the northern region, the same story. If you come to the central region, similarly the same, apart from an addition of profenophos, it was also in there. Also in the western. So you see that across the regions of the country, you still have detectable amounts of these molecules in our water sources. And then, of course, we note that the top 5 molecules that we saw there, we talk about glyphosate, aldicab, diclovos, atrazine. These were the top 5. Now, critical notes that I wanted us to look at. Glyphosate was the pesticide with the highest overall average concentration in these water molecules, rather in these water bodies. And also, it was followed by aldicab and diclovos. But of the top 5, 3 of them were actually actually highly hazardous. So you can imagine that the top 5, but 3 of them are already highly hazardous. We also see that profenophos was actually the highest, detected in the highest number of water bodies. So across, you would see profenophos and then diclovos. Then that is all about the water. And the second question was whether these molecules are actually in our food. I didn't want to go into this, but we realized that we got some bit of tomato samples. I didn't want to go so much into this, but we found that actually in our tomatoes, we still found higher levels of highly hazardous molecules. Looking at now the tomatoes, we asked ourselves, what are we going to tell consumers? That your tomatoes are full of chemicals. So how are we going to tell them? We got samples. Some of them, we washed them with hot water. And other samples were washed with cold water. Some other samples were peeled, just to understand what happens with the concentration level. Now, when we did this, very interesting results. When we peeled tomatoes, the chemicals, especially mancozeb, it reduced by 69%. So meaning that you have a 31% still present in the tomato, even after peeling it. And then when we washed with warm water, there was a reduction by 38%. So what that means is that you have 32% of the chemicals still present in the tomato, even after washing it with cold water, or rather warm water. We went ahead to wash with cold water, and we had a 30% reduction, meaning that you have a 70% chemicals very present in the tomatoes. Yeah. So, and then we asked ourselves the last question, whether these chemicals then, if they're in water and our food, whether they could actually be in our bodies. So looking at these photos again, they should give you a reflection of probably the findings. Urine samples were picked from farmers in Wakiso district between 2017 and 2019. And very interestingly, we still found these molecules in people's urine. So that shows you the magnitude of the problem that we are dealing with. You still see mancozeb, glyphosate, 2,4-D in people's urine. So it's a little bit a mess. And then as I conclude, this other study was investigating these molecules still, and they found out that farmers who are exposed, for instance, to mancozeb, they had impaired visual memory, they had language problems, they had motor function problems, they had even complex attention problems, that you put them in such a room in 5 minutes, they are not reasoning with us together, just because of too much exposure to these molecules. And then also they had poor sleep quality that we observed. So basically, that is it. And we want to acknowledge, of course, our partners with whom we've been doing this work over the time. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you picked something.
First, I want to appreciate all our Zoom participants. There's a lot of conversation going on right now, and a lot of questions which we can't get to all of the questions. So what we'll do is we'll share contacts of the presenters, and you can follow up the questions later. But I would like to read 2 questions and then allow Debbie, who is joining us from South Africa, to ask her question. So the 2 questions are from Adembo, who is asking, do the current water and sewerage capacity to clean the HHPs? I think that this is a question for Faith, or maybe Enoch, you'll decide. Okay. The second question I would like to read out is from...
With regards to the risk assessments and the ecotox data, I'm all for having a temperate tox package, where the temperate countries like the African continent develop their own area, and not always use the EU tox criteria and then use an extrapolation factor to get to the data to use for the temperate climates. The reason why is that it's not precautionary enough for temperate climates. So what we have seen, yes, I see Vera nodding her head. Vera and I on the same page. Yes.
Thank you.
So what we actually need to do is we need to develop our own tox package. And what I can say is South Africa has already developed the Daphnia. And the Daphnia has been a very debatable, hot topic on do we use do we use Pulis? For South Africa, I would say we use both. And the reason why is that for the invertebrates, for the fish and for the crustaceans, you use Pulis because it's more precautionary. but for birds and bees and that sort of thing, so for the aquatic environment, just for the aquatic crustaceans, the invertebrates, but not the fish. You use Pulis. For the fish, you can use Daphnia, because Daphnia is actually quite a broad. It's a broad indicator. It's not a precise indicator. So yes, so that would be my suggestion, because that's the data. Hi, Silke. That's the data that we've been getting in South Africa at the moment, and because there's a company in South Africa which I think maybe I would like to just mention.
I'm sorry, we don't have enough time. I think we'll just keep that. I'm really sorry to cut you short. Perhaps a quick response from Vera, who was agreeing with your points. Vera.
Well, I have already followed up in the chat. I fully agree about indeed the necessity of having indeed accounting for these temperate climate implications on the risk assessment protocol. So I'm hoping that indeed after this I can follow up with Debbie to hear more about her experience and the plans around these protocols and criteria. Cannot wait to hear more. So all in on it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. There was the question on do the current water and sewerage facilities have capacity to clean the HHPs? Our researchers on the panel. Dr. Faye?
So there's a study we did for one of the wastewater treatment plants, not one, but so both in the Lake Victoria South Basin and the Lake Victoria North Basin. So the wastewater treatment plants, majorly stabilization ponds with combination of trickling filters, are not originally designed to remove the pesticides, nor the other chemicals. However, for some of these contaminants, we see removal. Some scientists say it's not removal, it's a phase transfer. So you're just removing it from the water to the sludge. But some of the pesticides can also photodegrade, so you're also transforming them. So they're in between. So
okay.
it's not complete removal.
Yes, Silke has a point to add.
Yeah, I just want to have a point or like a point of discussion on the first comment from Debbie and also from Vera, developing the own local risk assessment, tox tests, maybe also monitoring. The question is, who's paying for it? Argue that needs to pay for it because they're selling on the information from Europe or US where it has previously been registered. So they basically need to provide these additional data, but to make sure that they're for it, and universities, researchers are doing the.
Yeah, there's one more question I peeped online what was still up on the screen. It was asked by I can't remember the name, but the question is, and it's what I had and probably what a lot of people in the audience have here, is that if we have so much evidence about the effects of these HHPs, why is it so difficult to enforce a ban on them? Why are we still importing them? Why are we still using them? Why are we still exposing our farmers and environment to it? I don't know who has an answer. I don't know who has an answer to that question. Why? Why not? Bernard, why is Uganda still allowing it?
I think, without contradicting myself, it would be greed of our leaders, because the evidence is tabled, the evidence is available, and we do not know why. It could be greed.
My name is Matofari, and the question you have just, why nothing is actually taking place, despite all this data that is giving evidence. We call it what? Evidence-based. I think the elephant in the room is the cross-cutting issues. Number one, we have not actually looked at our policy reforms as much as they are there, but how coordinated are they from country to country, intra, and what have you? We have a big problem. Somebody mentioned about transboundary problems. That one we have not addressed. Number two is, of course, we are talking about political issues. The biggest problem we have is the political goodwill. Somebody has mentioned we talk about our leaders. You know, this question of our leaders is the problem. because who imports, who sells, and how is it difficult to say no to this particular compound? Number 3 is awareness. The users, for example, the farmers, you see, they want to get the cheapest and be able to see how it can be able to control the problem. Because there are 2 issues here of interest. Number 1, the consumer, especially in the food chain, is actually after safety. But the person producing is after trade. Now, when you put together business and safety issues, you see there is a conflicting issue. The farmer wants to sell to make money. The consumer is after safety. How do we correlate this? So all those particular awareness, the practices, and the policy issues, and of course, the politics. If we can be able to address this, then that question you have actually asked, it goes across probably Africa, if not East Africa, as we are talking about. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Francis Ngiri, a farmer from Elementaita, Nakuru. And my question to the panelist is, in your research findings, do you think you have enough, there is enough evidence which can be used to seek justice in a court of law, especially here in Kenya? And if it is, why do you think no one can go to court using that evidence because it is out there? Where is someone not going to court maybe to seek legal justice because we have evidence of farmers being affected by those pesticides? We even have laws which are enforcing, like in Kenya, Cap 326, there is a law which says you have to dress your sins with those chemicals so that it can be certified. So if no one can go to court, that means this impact, the pesticide effect will continue affecting. Why do you think no one intends to go to court? Is it that your findings have not enough evidence or what? Thank you.
We've already gone to court, and the evidence we've been able to submit to court, the judge has agreed with us, and we have a preliminary ruling to that effect. So people are coming to court, and we hope in future, given the preponderance of evidence being even tabled here with so much, and our court are actually agreeing with the submissions you're making. Thank you. We began a petition at the Environment and Land Court in Milimani, Kenya. Petition E 048 of 2022. And recently on 18th of September, we had a ruling. And the Lady Justice, Kemei, even allowed so many other peoples and parties seated here even to join the petition because of the gross effect that these pesticides have been having to the people of Kenya. And so we are inviting interested parties. We are joining patients. Right now we have about 200 patients who've suffered from Parkinsonism, lymphomas, who are joining the petition. On 13th of November, we'll be back again in court, and these patients will be coming, and we also invite you to come, and we are winning this war. Thank you. My name is Kelvin Kubai. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I practice in Kenya, Nairobi.
Very quickly, I think I agree 100% with his sentiments in terms of the need for political will. But it doesn't rest there. I've interacted with our farmers. My work is majorly in the field, and I do speak to some of these farmers about these pesticides and all that. And it is quite surprising that our farmers do not even know which pesticides are these that have been banned. So number one, we need to educate, to disseminate this information to our very, very local farmers, telling them pesticide ama chemical XYZ has been banned. You are not supposed to use it because they don't know. Number two, I think companies producing these chemicals need also to be held responsible because they are working scot-free. These chemicals are coming day in, day out across Africa. And I've never had a company that has been named, shamed that you are bringing this to Kenya, yet it is a banned chemical. So it's a call to all of us really to amplify these voices, call upon these companies, hold them responsible, and to account for the action and how they are killing us slowly.
A question to Enoch. I happen to have been working with one of the regulators in the horticulture industry some years back. And I remember in the early 2000s, there used to be a program funded by the EU called PAP. A lot of these were towards chemical safe use. But again, they were for the export market guys. Now, the program kind of failed. It didn't really impact so much. To an extent that some years back, a lot of our produce were being intercepted in the EU. Kenya actually were banned from exporting produce to the EU. In your opinion, what are some of the lessons that were actually could learn from that project that really didn't take off, that we can also actually help our local farmers produce food better in a safe way? Thank you.
Thank you very much. How do we help the farmers? And remember, farmers are just part of a holistic approach to the chain. We are looking at the farmers at that basic level. Actually, the biggest problem we have is awareness. The farmer is, to consume what is available and what fits his or her pocket. So the only way, and for example, what we have presented here, I've not actually seen how systematic we can be able to help come up with the way forward from this data that we are actually having. The farmer needs awareness. How do we empower the farmer to know? Of course, policies have been, like Warui, of course, outlined the policies in the morning. But then, how many farmers actually are aware of this? Two, the way we have our communication system through maybe extension staff, agriculturists, or now the NGOs that we have on the ground, on even the active, they call what, the active groups that we have here now. You see, the haphazard way of communication of this information to the farmer also makes the farmer confused. This is my observation. So, as much as like what we have published is not reaching the farmer, is the right communication as a way of risky communication in the powerful way. Definitely the farmer is still being confused and will buy what he or she can afford and wants business. The most important thing is to empower. Let us start with the consumer, for example. If I'm aware of what I'm consuming, the way now it goes, like what the lawyer has said about the diseases that are coming in as a result of non-communicable diseases, then that is the beginning of reversing the whole system. Because if I say I'm not going to eat this, the farmer will definitely change because he wants to sell. If the farmer is not aware of you want the agrovet next to it, do I have this, my chicken or my fruits and vegetables, cabbage and what have you? This is exactly the whole thing. So the only way is to approach in a manner of awareness. This awareness will change the practice and we shall see the impact.
I just want to share with us something very small. One time we're engaging with the EU on this subject, and one contentious issues came out. The guys were saying, no, we have prior informed consent to your countries, that before they send us a highly hazardous molecule, they inform our countries in advance, 1 year before the chemical is sent. And our leaders sign consent. So when we were blaming the EU, they asked us, but your country leaders signed. You see that controversy. So the issue is, are even our leaders aware? Do they have the capacity to understand these things? I think also there is something we need to do with them. I think so. Because that statement was too big for us to digest. That our leaders have, so they even went ahead to show us the leaders are all African countries responsible for signing this thing. So you can even access, wherever you are, you're able to access that list. your leaders who are supposed to sign or who sign these molecules, you're able to see it on your phone, on your computer where you are. So I think we need to do a lot of capacity building for our communities, but also our leaders. We need to create a lot of awareness, communities, everybody, but also the issue of the education system. A lot of extension workers have been trained on conventional. If you go to our communities, how many of our extension workers actually speak about agriculture or organic or whatever? Most of our workers, they have mad that you must speak. So it's a little bit difficult for us to think that a person who has been groomed in that way, given a scholarship for a PhD in those things, then will come and start talking about agroecology. So I think it's also an issue of our education system. How do we ensure that the alternatives to the chemicals are actually embedded within our curriculum in schools, in universities, etc. So I think we can also deal with it from that angle of the education sector. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly, I just want to make one appeal as we go to lunch. Question: does anyone seated in this hall today have that list of banned chemicals by the government of Kenya? Can anyone here help us get that list of banned chemicals? Because, Ferdinand, to answer your question, I think that's what we need to do now. We need to out because you have it. Excellent. Thank you. So just
something, not only the active ingredient, but also the brand.
Yes.
Because when you go, like when we were going around in Migori, Homa Bay, asking the farmers which compounds they use, they know Thunder, they know Lightning, they know Saddam, they don't know Mancozeb, they don't know Diazinon.
Yeah.
So the two should go together.
Exactly. Yeah. So, guys, I know there were questions to be asked, and we will have to ask these questions later because the last thing I want to do is to eat into your lunchtime. There was also a lot of interest. Just hold on a second. From Kelvin, who spoke, and people needed to know who exactly is suing and so on. So just to interest you, Kelvin has a presentation in the afternoon where you can ask him all those justice-centered questions around highly hazardous pesticides, and I'm sure he will give you all the answers. But for now, I think maybe the best way to get us into lunch is to get a chef to speak to us to help reduce some of the loss of anxiety and lack of appetite that has gone on here today, right? So I hope he does that and not the opposite. But let's see what he has for us. He's only going to take 5 minutes, and then that is how we'll step out for lunch. His name is Njavi Kabui, and he's a Kenyan diasporan residing in North Carolina. Kabui has a background in political, medical, and urban anthropology and culinary arts. That is the art of food. And he works in advocacy, food design, and is an organic chef. He's also a farmer in Kenya. Please lead us into lunch.
Habari zenu. Okay, mine. I'm not going to use a lot of jargon, so I'm glad I don't even have a presentation because I don't need one. For mine, I'm talking about something simple in very, very simple languages that anybody can understand. Okay, I hope disappoint. Okay, so I have a very simple, very, very simple approach to food. I've heard about the legal angle of it, and all of them are relevant. But for me, I have a very, very, very different approach to this. There is something that came up in the presentation about snails. Snails can withstand all these things, right? All these chemicals you use, the snails don't seem to be bothered. So I asked myself, are African snails? So I can sit down. We must think we are snails. You see, because I get very, very angry and I get very, very emotional. Get treated the way they allow themselves to be treated. Pure and simple. I stopped eating food that's not organic in February 28, 1991. I don't give a damn about whether it's my grandmother's ignorance or my mother who loves me or anybody else. I don't eat crap. Simple. And if you say that, we go home. He said, I live in the diaspora farm in Kenya. I don't put my money in the stock market. I put my money where my values are. and I'm not saying this bragging. People say what house they've been. Told you, yeah? Monsanto is paying some of these people, man. Yes. Some people say in the diaspora we earn a lot of money. We went to work. We built investment properties and all that. I built. That's why I went to the U.S. I have my house here. The amount of Monsanto, please allow me. We'll fight outside. So, yes. So I travel with my house. If I get arrested, I live in my house because there are two kinds of houses that you have. There's a house you live in. That's one, and a lot of people live in very beautiful houses. But my friend, they will never show you the house that live in them because the house that lives in them is worse than a ghetto. Okay? So I ask you, as an African, what do you stand for? Take, as I close, the example of Palestinians. The Palestinians are facing a lot of problems. But the Palestinians fight. Because of that, some people in America who are going to Ivy League schools are willing to sacrifice their degrees and their graduation because they believe genocide is bad. Who is fighting for Africans? They are dying in Congo, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Sudan. Nobody. Because Africans allow themselves to be treated as crap. Pure and simple. If you don't eat bad food, they won't stock it. They won't stock bad food if you don't eat it. If you're educated, why are your people in your village not educated? So I have an organic farm in my village. If you want to come, can you please me pass the album? Somebody has my album here. Oh, right here. So that I don't just talk. See, these are the organic seeds that I grow. They're here. If you want to come, you can see. These seeds cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money. The one thing that I'll fight and go to jail and die for, if you give my children bad food. So for my first 17 years, I don't do much work. I get paid for speaking and for thinking. I don't get paid for working. I get paid for speaking and thinking. And Africans seem to be allergic to that for the most part. You know, we are very comfortable to go to America and work in nursing home. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not bashing work, right? But we can all work. Some of us have to be strategists. Some of us have to be informers. You know, the governments have informers. If you think there are all these other governments, Israel, all these America, Russia, they don't have informers. They have informers. Why do we not have informers? That's why we are treated like that. That's all. So I won't eat crap. Don't eat crap. This. I engage in every aspect of food design. I design my own cuisine. Afrofuturistic conscious cuisine. That's where I'll stop. My cuisine has a destination. No, it has a root. I mean, see? My food has a root. And I'm not tied to the roots. A lot of people say, we should go to our indigenous. Really? Who thinks like that? Why are you not wearing a cow skin? If you care so much about indigenous food, then don't go to work. Don't go to school because you're indigenous people. Your ancestors didn't go to school. So I'm not tied to my roots. But I cannot deny my roots. I cannot aggravate my roots. A lot of people who are talking about roots, they are also doing all these other models. Only the food they want to enslave. But they have new clothes, they have name brands, and all that kind of stuff. So my food starts with African, Afrofuturistic. I'm deeply influenced by Fela Kuti, the one most honest artist who used their craft to change society and to fight oppression. Then Afrofuturistic. My cuisine has a destination. I want to be here in the future. The most expensive thing that will be here in the next 20, 30 years is an organic sperm. Because you had all that. Because we have contaminated eggs, we have contaminated sperms, we are having children with what? All kinds of diseases, right? So I'll stop there. Futuristic, conscious, very conscious. I think very consciously. So other than work, I raise my children. I didn't want anybody. When I go to the birthday party, I go there with my child. If you give my child pizza, I say, no, he doesn't eat pizza. He's liberated. If you give them Coke, no, we don't drink Coke. I fight to the best, all of them, because we have to stand for what we believe. Is that too much to ask? Thank you very much. Ask me any questions you have.
All right. Chef Kabui, thank you.